civil rights movement. This was something that was intended directly for his congregation. And so it's personal in that sense, because he's speaking to the people in his community, the people in his neighborhood, the people we cared about, his parishioners. And I think this speech, this sermon, speaks across time to us. So I want to talk about that with you, and it was entitled The Drum Major Instinct. And what I want to talk about with you, at least specifically about this particular sermon, is that it's delivered February 4th, 1968. And this is 2 months before Dr. King's assassination. And it's interesting because in this speech, Dr. King, we're used to hearing the mountaintop speech where Dr. King is in Memphis and he says, I may not get there with you, and people kind of share that. But in this speech, Dr. King also talked about his death. It's like he had kind of a foreboding of what was to come. And I'm actually going to play a part of that for you today. But that's not what I want to focus on. But this is 2 months before his assassination, and Dr. King shared that in this particular speech, he hoped that at his funeral, if people did remember him, they would remember him for trying to love somebody. And he gives this kind of long meditation on what it means to be significant or important. I want to share that with you today. That'll be our purpose. Now, look, I recognize we're not in church, but Dr. King was a Christian minister, and so this is a sermon, and so part of what I have to do is set the context for that sermon. So I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I have to do this because otherwise the speech would not make sense, and so I've got to create the context for you. So Dr. King begins by saying that his text for that day was going to be the Gospel of Mark, and he tells the story of James and John in the Gospel of Mark. And in his kind of introduction to this, he begins by reading the text, and he says, there were these two apostles, James and John, and they go to Jesus and they approach him and they say to Jesus, hey, look, teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. Now, anybody who's in a position of leadership, anyone who is you don't have to be a CEO, you can be a manager of a department, you can run your child's softball team, but we all know what this is, hey, could you hook us up? But you can't say no. Whatever we ask, you got to do. Everybody follow me here? But we've been with you the longest, right? We know you, we've been here. So we're just asking this of you because, and you can't say no. Whatever it is, you can't say no. So Jesus responds to them, what is it that you want from me? And they respond, grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left hand in your glory. We want to be first. We want to be when you establish your kingdom, because they're not seeing Jesus at this time as a spiritual leader. They're actually thinking he's coming to liberate the Jewish people. And so they think he's a military leader. And they're making the case that we'd like the exalted position of being your chief lieutenants, second in command, the vice president, the assistant manager. You follow me here? Jesus has a very interesting response from that Martin Luther King shares with his congregation. He says, but Jesus said to them, you do not know what you're asking. And they were like, we're pretty clear we know what we're asking. We want to be first. We want to be in that exalted position. We want to be recognized. We want to be close to you. We want the proximity. We want the glory. So Jesus responds to them, are you able to drink the cup that I drink or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? In other words, are you willing to go through what it takes to actually be first, to get what you say that you want? And they respond to him, of course, yeah, absolutely. We're ready to do that. We're ready for the glory. We're ready to take it on. And he continues, the cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left hand is not mine to give you. It's not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. So he's saying to them, in essence, I can't really give you what you ask me because you have to earn it. It's not something that can be granted. It's not something that can be bestowed upon you. It's not something that anybody can give you. It's not a title. It's a calling. He concludes, Dr. King, and kind of sharing this with his congregation, by telling them that the setting, and I'm quoting King here, is clear. James and John are making a specific request to the master. They had dreamed, as most Hebrews dreamed, of a coming king of Israel who would set Jerusalem free and establish his kingdom on Mount Zion and his righteousness in the rule of the world. And they thought of Jesus as this kind of king. And they were thinking of that day when Jesus would reign supreme as this new king of Israel, and they would be there. Now he says, Dr. King, to his congregation, now very quickly we would automatically condemn James and John, and we would say they were selfish. Because that was kind of a greedy move in that moment. That you're going to be big. We want part of the spotlight. And King says, but don't too hastily condemn them because there's value in what they did, even though we'd be quick to assume that what they did was just self-interest, naked self-interest. Maybe it was, but he's going to turn it a little bit. He says to them, why would they make such a selfish request? But before we condemn them too quickly, let us look calmly and honestly at ourselves. And we will discover that we too have those same basic desires for recognition, for importance, the same desire for attention, that same desire to be first. Now, my friends, what's powerful about this is that King says to his congregation, of course, the other disciples got mad with James and John, and you could understand why, but we must understand that we have some of the same qualities that James and John had, and that is deep down within all of us an instinct. It's a kind of a drum major instinct, a desire to be out front, a desire to lead the parade, a desire to be first, and it's something that runs the whole gamut of life. And so King gives some pretty concrete examples of this. He goes, it's kind of the ego. Babies, when they first cry, what do they want? Attention. And we spend the rest of our life chasing attention, right? In fact, King says the most successful advertisers are peerless advertisers because they play on your desire for attention. He talks about in his sermon, and it resonated with me, that you ever get one of those advertisements in the mail that says, we've recognized you as a discriminating consumer. Someone who has impeccable taste and class, and so therefore we thought that this vehicle, which you can't afford, would be perfect for you. And King says eventually people find themselves in this conundrum where they chase that recognition, whether that recognition is in their job, whether it's in terms of education, whether it's in terms of their possessions, right? And when other people catch up, they feel that pressure to go one step further because they want to be out front. So if somebody else gets a new car, I got to get a new car, right? If somebody gets a master's degree, I get a PhD. If they get a PhD, then I got to get a second master's and a PhD for the PhD's master's PhD. And then people ask you, what do you do? And you say, I don't know, I go to school. Because I'm chasing this elusive thing called first and not really invested in the meaning of what those things should empower us to do. In fact, King concludes, and I love this cartoon, I'm the alpha, if that's okay. King concludes really powerfully that the drum major instinct, this desire to lead, is natural, but can lead to selfish ambition if left unchecked. The challenge, he argued, was to redirect this instinct towards service and toward love. I love this. I teach tomorrow's leaders, so I'm kind of a big deal. It's kind of that drum major instinct, right? People often ask me, they'll go, do you want us to call you Dr. Williams? I'm going to tell you a story because it's complicated. I appreciate that because when I first became a teacher, I taught in a private school in Washington, D.C., and they were an alternative school, and none of the teachers went by the name Mr. or Miss. That was part of the appeal of the school. They were like, well, we call all the teachers by their first name. There were only 2 teachers of color, and we kind of bristled at this, and people couldn't understand why we were so upset. And one day, one of the other teachers, the other teacher of color, articulated it in a way that I like to share with people because she said, the problem, what you don't understand is that I've spent my entire life trying to be somebody. And so therefore, that miss that you extend to me is more meaningful because in this world, often it's difficult for people to see me without that title, without that honorific. So that's not what King's talking about here, but he's talking about something else. And I want to be very clear about that with you as we move forward. King says to his congregation that day, if you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be the servant. And King's message to them was true greatness is rooted in service. So in this desire to lead, he makes the case and warns us against the pursuit of recognition over meaningful action. That in essence, the drum major instinct can lead to exclusivity, he argues, arrogance, and selfishness. And he goes one step further and challenges his congregation and by extension, all of us to lead with humility and principle. The things that today we would associate with the principles of servant leadership: listening, empathy, promoting healing, being aware of ourselves and others, the art of persuasion rather than fiat. I told you, and so therefore that's the way it's going to be. Even the reason he chose that particular text from Mark is that that's what the master practices in talking to James and John and persuading them that, you sure this is what you want? Because if it's what you want, recognize that what you're going to take on is a lot different than what you perceive you're going to get out of it. The idea of conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment to the growth of the organization, the people, and a building of community. And you see all of that in what King is laying out to them. And I want to play, excuse me, let me go back one. And I want to play part of that speech for you because I think it's good for you to hear it in King's own words. Now, I want to share this with you in this way, because Dr. King could read the phone book and be compelling. He's a wonderful speaker. But I really want you to kind of dig into his message today and listen to what he's sharing with his congregation. So I want to play part of this for you.
And so Jesus gave us a new norm of greatness. If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. That's a new definition of greatness. And this morning, the thing that I like about it, by giving that definition of greatness, it means that everybody can be great. Because everybody can serve. Every now and then, I guess we all think realistically about that day when we will be victimized with what is life's final common denominator. That's something that we call death. We all think about it, and every now and then I think about my own death, and I think about my own funeral, and I don't think of it in a morbid sense. And every now and then I ask myself, what is it that I would want said? And I leave the word to you this morning. If any of you are around when I have to meet my day, I don't want a long funeral. And if you get somebody to deliver the eulogy, tell them not to talk too long. And every now and then I wonder what I want them to say. Tell them not to mention that I have a Nobel Peace Prize. That isn't important. Tell them not to mention that I have 300 or 400 other awards. That's not important. Tell them not to mention where I went to school. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want you to say that day that I tried to be right on the war question. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try to feed the hungry. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try in my life to clothe those who were naked. I want you to say on that day that I did try in my life to visit those who were in prison. I want you to say that I tried to love and serve humanity. Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness. And all of the other shallow things will not matter. I won't have any money to leave behind. I won't have the fine and luxurious things of life to leave behind. But I just want to leave a committed life behind. And that's all I want to say. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word of song, if I can show somebody he's traveling wrong, then my living will not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian ought, if I can bring salvation to a world once wrought, if I can spread the message as the Master taught, then my living will not be in vain. Yes, Jesus, I want to be on your right or your left side. Not for any selfish reason. I want to be on your right or your left side, not in terms of some political kingdom or ambition, but I just want to be there in love and in justice and in truth.
So I wanted to play that for you because it's a very powerful portrait of King to his congregants in what he doesn't know is his last speech, but he's making the case to them that in that moment of turmoil, he was asking them to think about service in a very different way. The reason I'm sharing that with you folks is that we're now just a few months away from a grim anniversary, the 5th year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And I would be remiss if I didn't in some way connect this King Day to the anniversary that we're coming up on in this retreat away from, nationally, efforts to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion in workspaces, this move away from an effort to deal with issues of racial justice and equity in meaningful ways. In fact, we see a lot of corporations today, McDonald's being the most recent, who are running away from this work. They made a commitment 4 years ago. They said, we're going to do better. We pledged to do better. And now, in the aftermath of the Supreme Court's decision in Fair versus Harvard and some other things, you have a bunch of corporations that are looking for an off-ramp. They're saying too much. We did too much. In 2020, we wanted to be first or proximate. We wanted to have a diversity, equity, inclusion program that we could card out and say, we're leaders. And now that it's not popular, they're trying to find a way to distance themselves from that work. I share that with you because when we look at it in this context, what were they driven by? Because Dr. King is actually addressing that. They weren't driven by principle, they were driven by prestige. In that moment, 4 years ago, everybody rushed to have a diversity statement on their website. Everybody raced to be in a space where they could talk about what they were doing to address issues of equity. And now, as the cameras are about to come back to our community in particular, when people ask, what have you done? What'd you work on? What's your legacy? Because in the way that King's talking about it, and he's talking about his physical death, but I would submit to you in an abstract way, there's a little bit of the death of an opportunity that we all face in this moment if we were to retreat from this work in meaningful ways. Don't lose me here because this is very important. The challenge now is for us to stay in the work. I say that to you because when King talks about this new norm of greatness, there were a lot of people who were crossing their fingers out of hope that this moment would be different. There were a lot of people who were saying, I hope that we're going to come out of this situation with a better appreciation for those that we share community with. I hope that we're going to come out of this situation with a deeper regard for those people that we share this planet with. I hope we're going to come out of this situation in a way that we value what it means to be in community with each other. I hope we'll come out of this where we don't pay lip service to what Dr. King talked about. I hope we'll come out of this where 4 years later, we'll celebrate King Day and we'll say we're finally moving toward the vision, not the dream, but the vision that he articulated, which is a lot harder to find because the dream is easy. It's what's unattainable because it's just a dream, right? But if you look at the vision and the blueprint, what King talked about is actually entirely attainable. Why I played that particular section for you. The dream commits you to something that you can control, but he says to all of us, but you all can serve. Anybody can serve. You don't need a PhD to serve. You don't need to be a CEO to serve. You don't need a doctorate degree to serve. You don't need any of that. Just find a way to be a part of the solution. My friends, what's powerful about this is that in the midst of those pledges that people made, in the midst of checking boxes, because there was a lot of emphasis on training. People wanted to do training. In fact, I had one corporate partner, and I say this with some shade, but I don't mean it in the way that it's coming out, that said to me, look, we appreciate the work that you do around education, but the reality is, Dr. Williams, we just want cultural bias training. We want to do what everybody else is doing. That's what we want to do, that thing. We want to check this box and say that we went through the exercise, right? That we committed in this way and we've got our diversity statement on our website and that's our commitment to making this better and that's what we're prepared to do. And then when the storm came, they walked away from the work. I asked somebody the other night, my daughter, which is probably not the best target audience, if she knew what a drum major was. And she laughed at me. She says, of course, Dad, I know what a drum major is. I got to check with you because when I was a kid, there were a lot of parades, but there don't seem to be as many parades today. But if you were in band or you were a band nerd, you know the importance of the drum major is that they're the person who's out in front of everybody else. They kind of lead the band. They lead the parade. They get all the attention. If anything goes wrong with the marshal, with the band leader, the eyes are on that person and less on the band. You can be in the win section and get away with an off note. or a stumble, but you're not going to miss that if you're out front. And part of what we said to people when we started this work at RJI was that you train pets, but you educate people. So we didn't want to do training. We wanted to do education. In the same way that Dr. King was saying to his congregants in 1968, in February, the thing that I want people to remember about me is not the training, not my teachings, but my life as an example. If I'm first, let me be first for what I did, not what I earned, not what I said, not what I put on my website. If we want to talk about leading in this moment and what we can take from what Dr. King shares with us, in times of retreat, when everybody's running away, leadership requires courage and temerity. And to lead today, that means, number one, embracing challenges. And we're going to have some challenges in our community coming up. We have some challenges right now in our community we need to address. In fact, I love this t-shirt. I've been all about t-shirts today. I'm a leader, not a follower. Unless it's a dark place, then you're going first. Well, my friends, it's a dark place right now. Follow me. It's a dark place right now because there's this retreat from the work. There's this retreat from the idea that we had something that we could accomplish concretely in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, that we were ground zero, and that if we could lead in this community, we could be a national model of what it meant to try to build Dr. King's vision of a beloved community. If anybody understands the message of Dr. King and how it resonates, it's our community, because we lived it and we remain scarred from it. Thing that's powerful about that, at least for today, is that we can talk about that in terms of staying committed to racial justice and equity, but it also means expanding the work. Because in this moment, now's the moment to walk into the dark and to be uncomfortable. A couple of months ago, I was in Lisbon, Portugal, and my GPS was telling me that if I went down this alley, which was darkened, it would get me to my Airbnb faster. My wife was like, "We're not going down the alley." I was like, "But no, trust me. I mean, I'm with you, and there's nothing that we'll face in the dark that I can't handle." She goes, "I have supreme faith in you. I have no faith in your GPS or anybody else that's out here. So we're not going into the darkness. You're not going to lead me down into that alley. I don't care if it would shave 10 minutes off of this walk. I don't want to do that because I don't trust in this moment that I can control for everything else." What I'm saying to you, though, now is the supreme definition of leadership, as King shared on that day, is to walk into the darkness when everybody else is running for cover. For all the people that wanted to lead 4 years ago, for all the people like McDonald, Taha, that got way out in front in this conversation and got all the praise, got the drum major praise for kind of taking on the work, the question is, where are they now? And the people who really want to lead are the ones that are staying in it, because when they look to the left and the right, they're the only ones still standing. That is a leader. Not that you were first, but that you were committed. Not that you were first, but that you stayed. Not that you were first, but you were willing to do, in those moments when it got really, really dark, the work of continuing the work that you committed to, the pledges that you made, so that the people who had their fingers crossed that this moment would be different could still have faith in you and in the process. I don't want to lose you here, but I want to conclude with you. Got to go back one. I keep doing that. Well, no, I'm right. The drum major instinct today is not to dance to the beat of another tune, but to strike up the band. I want to be clear about this. What happened 4 years ago is a lot of people wanted to know, what do we need to do what the other guy's doing, to do what the other company's doing, to do what the other congregation is doing, to do what the other community organization is doing, to do what the other university is doing. And now in this moment, guess what? We're following suit with the same practice. Well, if they're doing that, we're going to do that too. If they're stepping away, we're stepping away. If they're saying we're not going to be involved, we're not going to be involved, right? But in this moment in particular, if you want to be the drum major, if you want to be the leader, then you lead by walking the opposite direction of other people. In fact, there were a lot of book clubs in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, and one of the books that people read with great relish and they loved it was by Isabel Wilkerson. It was called Cast. And the cover of the Cast book has this famous picture that was taken of a rally at Nazi Germany. And it's called The Face in the Crowd. And it's this picture of all these people who are doing the Heil Hitler salute. And there's one guy in the back with his arms folded like, this is some foolishness. And the whole point is that this is the guy who was walking in the opposite direction. It was like, I'm not going to be led down a path of not being committed to what I know is right, that represents my values, it represents what no one should have to tell us is the work that remains to be done in this community because we experienced that scar directly. The drum major may be a step ahead of the band, my friends, but what I want to share with you is what Dr. King said. It gets quoted all the time, but I want to share it with you today because I hope if I was successful, this quote will have a different meaning for you now. Dr. King said, and people love to put this on Facebook, they love to put it on Instagram, they love to tweet it or whatever people are doing now. They love to kind of put it on social media and be a representative of how they understand Dr. King's message, this in the dream. And they always quote, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. This is a time of challenge and controversy with regard to this work specifically. And for those people who say, and I had somebody share this with me recently, well, I don't know if we could talk about those things on Dr. King Day. Because that would be, if we can't talk about those things on Dr. King Day, something's wrong. If we find ourselves in a moment where the person whom we honor for standing against in that moment of darkness, all those things that in our community continue to challenge us. If we can't talk about that now, then when? That's why we honored him with the holiday. Not because he's perfect, you'll see that in the book. We don't celebrate King because he's perfect. He's a human being, he made mistakes, a lot of them. We celebrate King for his vision. And we celebrate him for his leadership because we hope that we can draw from his example some inspiration in our own time for how we can stay committed to the work. Last part of this, my friends. Sometimes, so I went to a HBCU, so some of you will understand this. Those band drum majors get in some awkward positions. I don't understand how they do that. Now, at 50, I committed to learning how to do a handstand, to which my daughter was like, you're going to break something, and I'm not going to call the ambulance to collect my inheritance and let you die. Because why would you do that at 50 years old? And I said to her, well, I'm doing it now because I want to be limber and ambulatory going into old age. And she said, dog, there are other ways to do that. It's called walking. Right? So there are other ways for you to achieve that goal. But I said, but look, Ella, see, I want to develop a sense of resilience. See, I want to be prepared for what I can't see coming. Just in case, if I can't walk the way that you normally walk, I can walk on my hands. That resilience means that I want to be in a situation where if anything comes my way and I got to have the dexterity, the flexibility, the resilience to move a little bit differently, I can move a little bit differently. You're not going to catch me flat-footed. I don't want to be on the track with everybody else. I'm fine to go on the track with everybody else, but I want to be walking first. And not walking first because I want to be ahead of them. I want to be walking first because I don't want them to shift direction and lead me off my path. Because I'm trying to do the 5 miles, not the 3. My friends, Dr. King, if you read the rest of that quote, said, nothing worthwhile is easy. See, the problem in America, the problem with us is we don't read the whole thing. Now, maybe that wouldn't fit on somebody's Facebook page, or maybe it wouldn't fit on Instagram, or maybe it wouldn't fit in a tweet, but I'm reading the whole thing for you today because you got to read the whole thing. He says, yes, all that, but nothing worthwhile is ever easy. In fact, he goes one step further. Your ability to overcome unfavorable situations will provide you with time to demonstrate your true strength and determination for success. So what he was encouraging us to do is lead with service, courage, and principle, to define greatness by action, not by applause. Because part of what King argued in that sermon is that people who chase applause also recognize that at some point when the applause stops, they lose any esteem or appreciation for whatever it is that gave them the applause. They just look for another opportunity for applause. Dr. King in that final meditation said something that I want to go back to before I end with you today. He said, you might be tempted to conclude that James and John were selfish and that I'm going to condemn them in the same way that we'd want to condemn them without recognizing that there's a little bit of James and John in all of us, right? And I appreciate that and understand that. Like Kathy jokes about me being a movie star, but every time somebody recognizes me from the food that built America, I get a little happy. And when it happens in front of people that I know, I get a little happy. I was at the outlets one day with my son who was visiting from Japan, and a guy came up and said, "You're the guy from food," right? And I was like, "I am." He goes, "Can I take a picture with you?" And I was like, "Oh my God, you can." And then he called me the wrong name. Anyway. And he was like, you're Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm like, no, I'm not. I wish I'm not. My point is, this is very important. My point is that King is saying that feeling to be first, that need is fine, but he gives us a different way to think about this. He says, I want you to be first in love. I want you to be first in moral excellence. I want you to be first in generosity. That is what I want you to do. And he transformed the situation by giving a new definition of greatness. And you know how he said it. He said, now, brethren, I can't give you greatness, and really, I can't make you first. This is what Jesus said to James and John. You must earn it. And my friends, it's earning time. It's earning time. I said to Sarah before I came today, I said, there's only one organization in the Twin Cities, two, that I'd be very comfortable delivering this message to, but one of them is Delta Dental, because the reality is healthy smiles make healthy communities inspires the hell out of me, because you're committed to the work in ways that are just tangible because it's baked into your DNA. But you do. So I don't have to sell you on the idea that King is articulating here. He concludes, true greatness comes not by favoritism, but by fitness. And the right hand and the left are not mine to give. They belong to those who are prepared. If I were to remix Dr. King for today, particularly for people who are worried about this moment, who are concerned about their work being labeled in a way that is not reflective of the commitment and values that we articulated 4 years ago, of the folks who think that right now it's time to get off the treadmill and wait for things to settle down, for those who think they're going into the dark and assume that going into the dark can only mean doom, I would simply say, let's revise King's words to meet our moment. Keep feeling the need to be first, but I want you to be first in building inclusion. I want you to be first in championing equity. I want you to be first in advancing justice. That's what I want you to do. Regardless of what other entities are doing, I want us to transform the situation by embracing that new definition of leadership. Friends, allies, colleagues, walking away won't give us excellence. It can't make us first. However, we can earn it. We can still earn it. True leadership comes not by recognition, not by applause, but by dedication. The titles of first and best are about vanity. The true fruit of leadership is evidenced by commitment. And the question this moment on King Day 2025 for all of us, for a variety of reasons, is with this grim anniversary upon us, what's our continued commitment to building truly healthy communities? Truly healthy communities. So those smiles are not veneers, they're real. They come from that deep fitness. So my friends, I conclude by saying to you, I'm never getting into that position. But I'm happy to be in this position with you. Because the other thing that Dr. King said that's really powerful is the time is always right to do what is right. If those words sit with you differently today because of the way that we looked at Dr. King's drum major speech, and you long to be first and continue to work and kind of be, then I'm telling you, I think that what he's telling all of us is that we can honor that commitment and legacy by continuing to work with service and principle being our guide. And then we'll be that unique drum major that everybody talks about. You ever watch the college game days and no one remembers the score, but they all remember the halftime show? I want us to be the halftime show. Years later, the halftime show will still be on YouTube and people will be saying, boy, that band played on. at the Titanic, it's a bad example. People say the band played till the ship went down, but the reality is what people remember is that the band played till the ship went down. Follow me here? But the band played on, and somebody led that work. And it wasn't about the person who was at the front. It was about the community of people who all made a decision in whatever capacity they had to continue to play and to continue to fight and to continue to lead. Happy Martin Luther King Day, and thank you for continuing to lead. Appreciate you. We have some time for Q&A, I think. Is this the first time I've been on time?
Yes, I'll answer that. I'll answer that
Yes,
for you.
and I'm on the mic now. That'd be a yes. Oh,
Well
sorry.
worth it though, well worth it, please. Questions for Dr. Williams?
You started out with talking about the commercialization. And you look at the DEI movement and how it started, and it almost embodied a commercialization of that movement. And then when it became less profitable or required, it seemed like that's when people started stepping away from it, right? Because it wasn't the shiny object. It wasn't the thing that was, oh, you're doing this and I want to do this too, just like you talk about, giving your lectures.
Yeah.
In your estimation, how do you change the framework of it where it becomes more of a table stakes rather than the shiny object of the moment, where it's not as inspirational, I would say, in that, because it's in the past, right? It's slowly becoming less and less germane to the conversation and mainstream. How do you take that idea and make it live and breathe beyond?
It's a great question, and I think part of it, this organization has done, GHR Foundation has done, a couple of other organizations in the Twin Cities that I think are standouts in this particular area. They embed it in their DNA and their mission statements in ways that then it's just part of the raison d'etre. What you do is defined by your commitment to these things. For a lot of folks, it was an add-on. And so that's why the commercialization was easy. It was easy to kind of put it on. It's like a jacket. You put it on and then you take it off. But if you stitch it into a one piece, right? Like one of those, I'm going to date myself by saying this, one of those Jackson 5 jumpsuits or Donnie and Marie jumpsuits, the Gen X people are in the building. Evil Knievel onesie, then you can't take it off without exposing yourself, because at that point, then you're naked, right? And what's left is the foundations for what you committed to that really didn't align with the values that you articulated at the same time. I think that the other part of the commercialization is also what we saw in response to the King holiday when it first became a reality. And that was that it was an opportunity for people to take a day off of work, not an opportunity for us to kind of revisit what King talked about. I have the same problem with the 4th of July. When we talk about civic education today, I lament the fact that we don't spend the 4th, not at barbecues, but talking about what democratic principles actually mean and kind of revisiting the foundations. Same argument I'd have about Juneteenth, Memorial Day, and a host of other holidays. It should be a renewal of our civic theology, our civil theology, which makes people uncomfortable when you say that. But I simply mean the belief systems that undergird what we think about and how we think about ourselves as Americans. Now, the interesting thing for me in terms of the commercialization aspect too is that Kwanzaa, like I can go into a host of places now, they'll be all over. I joke about Macy's and the white sale on Dr. King Day. Dr. King would have bristled at the fact that people were actually going out and engaging in consumerism on his birthday rather than thinking about the fact that he was one of the champions for making sure that equity also meant affordability. King was a champion of affordability. King would have been at the fort when he's killed in Memphis, marching on behalf of sanitation workers. He was also in the stages of planning a poor people's campaign to go to Washington, D.C. to address the issues of economic justice. It's King who writes memorably in his final book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? We made a mistake in the movement by talking about civil rights narrowly and not talking about economic justice. He wrote, what good is it to have the right to eat in a restaurant if you can't afford anything on the menu? Civil rights without economic justice are dead rights. And so King would have looked at our kind of modern, hey, 20% off at Macy's and said, I'm sorry to be picking on Macy's, but they do 20% off on King Day. He would have looked at it and said, this is not what I hoped people would be focused on in this moment. So part of our pushback has to be to kind of reset the table, reset the foundations. And I think to lead in a way, I've been saying this for 4 years now, and now it's going to be a reality. The cameras will be back here. in 3 months, 4 months. And they'll ask, you know, host of people, what have we done? Some people predictably will say we did nothing, which I think is wrong. There are a lot of organizations that made a commitment. I think there's a lot of practical things that we can talk about. There'll be some people who said, we solved the problem, and they'll be wrong. And there'll be some people who say, we sit in the discomfort of doing the work. We're in the discomfort of doing the work. And part of that is this idea, when you talk about commercialization in particular, that we're defining it as we go, because it was never as easy as putting on that jacket or putting up that statement that some people assumed it was 4 years ago. That's why they're gone. Last example I'll give you, and I would share this with you, there's a great podcast that just came out from the Star Tribune called Ghost of a Chance by a guy by the name of Eric Roper, who was a reporter there, who purchased a home in Minneapolis, which he discovered had been owned by a Black family, Harry and Clementine Robinson. And the great thing about the story is that when he discovered this, he went online, and there was a public history project called Mapping Prejudice, the Jim Crow of the North, which many of you have seen. And he discovered that those folks, that family, had been redlined out of their home. And so he went in search of that story, and he tells their story in the podcast. And in the podcast, they quote W. Gertrude Brown, who was an African-American social worker in the 1920s. So she is, you know, one of only in Minneapolis at that time. And she gives this address in 1927 to her colleagues, her predominantly white colleagues. And if you read the address, and you'll hear this in the podcast, if you listen to it, and it's phenomenal, I think it's in episode 3. I'm also in episode 3. You'll hear it in the podcast. She's giving a diversity, equity, and inclusion seminar to them in 1927. If you listen to it, it sounds suspiciously like what people are calling wokeism today, which isn't wokeism at all. It's simply people trying to get back to the foundations of our movement away from inclusivity and inclusive excellence is really why we keep winding up in a cycle. And she was trying to get her colleagues in that moment to kind of embed that in their work. And that's where they take the title of the podcast from. She says, people of color in this community are given a ghost of a chance. And the ghost is the shadows of promises made and unfulfilled. What did King just tell us in 68? The shadow of promises made and unfulfilled. So we have to sit in the shadow of promises kept and continually worked on. I basically gave you a lecture in response to a great question.
You're gonna get softball.
I loved it.
Other questions? Anyone else? Oh, if somebody's curious about something. Do we have one?
Somebody online?
Someone had some, yeah, and someone online, if you have a question, go off mute, and I thought we saw one in the
I think
chat.
it was just a confirmation. Did you say the podcast Ghost of a Chance? So
Ghost of a Chance, yeah. From the Star Trib. First 2 episodes are out. Really phenomenal.
it's the only question.
I have one for you, Dr. Williams.
Sure.
So I think last year you were a moderator at a public event for Martin Luther King Day. Are you going to be doing anything specific this year that's open to the public, or do you have any recommendations for any events around the Twin Cities, radio programs, anything that are going on that we could tune in on to?
Great question. A number of great things are happening here, a number of great things nationally. Sunday, the National Alliance for Faith and Justice and the 400 Years African American History Commission will air Justice Sunday, which is a 24-hour program that streams online, various platforms, which are basically a collection of speakers from various fields all around the life and legacy of Dr. King and what we can do in this moment. Incredible programming. It's always great every year. And if you miss something, you can kind of catch it in the loop, which is nice. Monday, General Mills puts on the annual Martin Luther King Day breakfast. That's always a great opportunity. I can't remember who the speaker is this year. Anybody remember? It's no one knows. I'll kind of send you a link for that. You can't go wrong there. I'm hosting the event for the state of Minnesota at the Ordway. So if you want to come out for that, that's free and open to the public. Eastside Freedom Library. What I'll do to make it easy, I'll send you a list of resources and some links that you guys can follow along. But there's a lot of great stuff going on in the Twin Cities and a lot of great stuff that you can link up with nationally. So thank you. But if you want to catch me specifically, Ordway, 8 a.m., St. Paul.
10 a.m.
10 a.m. Thank you. I got to be there at 8 a.m. I got to be there at 8. So, no, 10 a.m. Thank you. Great question.
Who's next? Dr. Williams, I'll ask a question.
Sure.
So we talked about those that are walking away from their commitments that they made 4 years ago. You have any examples of some things that have continued in our city? Some of the trends that you can report on in the past 4 years?
There are two in particular that I would want to talk about. I love what Hennepin County has done. They've kind of been on this journey and they're trying to explore ways in which they can make all the departments that make up county services responsive to what was exposed, I think, in a very stark way in 2020, and they continue that work in deeply meaningful ways. Sometimes it's highly politicized, and I'll give you guys one example of this. Mary Moriarty and what's happening with the Hennepin. Now, I don't want to get too political here, but I don't think this is political in saying this. There are those folks who are saying, you know, Mary Moriarty, we need to get tough on crime, and Mary Moriarty is saying, I agree, we need to deal with criminality in our community, but these are youthful offenders, and this is how we wind up in the cycle. She's making this argument, which others have made historically, that if we don't figure out a new way to do this, we're simply waiting for the next tragedy. She goes, I understand it's hard. We're in the darkness now. We're waiting for somebody to wind up in one of these unfortunate circumstances where somebody is seriously injured by one of these kids. And she goes, but I'm trying to make sure that we do it the right way so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we end up nuking, and then we find ourselves in this kind of moment where we're gonna have to go back. And so I love what Hennepin County is doing, more so in housing, and there's some great things that are happening in terms of housing with them. So I wanna call them out as kind of a public entity. In terms of corporations, Rod, I don't wanna call out any of my partners specifically, but I am very impressed with a number of organizations whose commitments have extended to dealing with very concrete areas around housing, access to places of public accommodation, and justice reform. The justice reform stuff is very close to me, and I spend a lot of time working with organizations that do that. And there are a number of corporations who people would not expect to be a part of that conversation, who are deeply a part of that conversation, deeply involved. And I'm not just talking about philanthropic dollars. I mean, they are in it, trying to understand it, trying to be a part of the change that's happening in this community. And when the cameras come back, those are some of the stories that I want to be able to tell. I don't want people to walk out of this moment assuming that everybody left, because that's also dangerous. The other part is that when we all assume that everybody left, then you're kind of like, well, I guess I'll shut the lights out. I was the last one out. No. If we stay in the work, then we're the first one in when everybody comes back, or actually we never left. We kept the lights on. And I like to be the people that, you know, I love to talk about the organizations that kept the light on. And Delta's I love working with you because I feel like Delta Dental of Minnesota is a model of what that looks like. And I can point to a number of things. I'll just point to the work that you do with Santa Foundation in particular. That's what I mean by deep, longitudinal engagement with an organization committed to the long-term health of a community. People say that trying to address racism is like boiling the ocean. Well, you don't boil the ocean. You tackle these things in small areas where you can have impact, and you dig in and you stay in the work. And that makes a difference. People don't see it. It may not be evident. And when you're walking through that tunnel, right? If you can convince your wife to go in, when you're walking through that tunnel, you may not see the other side, but eventually you get to the other. And King talked about that. He said it's like approaching a city in the fog. You can't see it in the fog, but as you get closer along, you begin to see it in the distance, and you realize you did the right thing by staying the course. It's the people that stop in the middle of the fog, that turn around, that, you know, kind of drift off course, that then have to redirect and get back into that tunnel at some point, rather than the folks that stay in it. So I just wanted to call Delta Dental out, in particular, Hennepin County. I could mention some others, but again, I don't want to catch, if I'm fortunate enough to be asked about this when the cameras come back, I will have a lot of positive things to say about a lot of organizations, but I can assure you I'll be leading with Delta Dental. And I think you should give yourselves a round of applause for that, because that's a big deal.
Agreed. Actually, Dr. Williams, you went exactly where I wanted you to, is that it's not all doom and gloom. Some great things have been happening and are happening yet. Or however, I use the word however instead of saying but. We have a long way to go. We have a long way to go. And to Dr. Williams' point, for us as an organization, you know, I don't even think about this being what we do and how we show up in this community, because it is in our DNA. It is natural. and it feels that way on many fronts. And we did some things and we've been very intentional. As an example, Kathy, where's Kathy? Did she leave? Is she, okay, she's back here. Kathy and her team are out and about. I always say that I should be Kathy's agent because she's had more appearances than anyone from that perspective. And all of you that contribute, I'll call out the marketing department, particularly Cassie's team. They have taught me more about what's available around diversity in the community than I would ever know from. They visited all kinds of things and had lunches in places that I've never heard of, as an example. A long way of saying that I take great pride in who we are as an organization and the work that we do. And we are all staying curious, and that's what this is all about, Dr. Williams. You're teaching and sharing to help fill our education, our knowledge needs. So anything else for Dr. Williams? Question, comment? Go ahead, Tom.
Thanks, Rod. I'd love to
Hey,
ask a
Tom.
question. Dr. Williams, thank you.
Good to see you.
The question that I have is, when we think about organizations that are running from their commitment, what role does fear play in that? And when we think about organizations that are embracing and running to their commitment, what role does courage play in that?
That's a great question. That's a great question. For the organizations that stay in the work, I would hope if I had a magic wand, it would be more of what we talked about in terms of organizations that embedded it so much in their DNA that they didn't even see it as staying in the work. It's just kind of who we are and what we do. So that would be my ideal. For those that are running away, and I did. Vanita Sarkar I was on with her after McDonald's, and she said, what would you say to corporations that are kind of running away, or corporations that are rebranding? Because some of them say, well, we're not running away at all. We're just kind of recasting what we do because we don't. No, the minute you're at a point where somebody's telling you that your commitment has to be framed in a particular way, you're no longer doing that work. So if you reframe it, it should be reframed in the spirit of who you are to make it possible for you to continue the work unabated. It shouldn't be, well, we're trying to serve kind of external factors that have nothing to do with those things that, at least in terms of how we talk about classic corporate social responsibility, the organization's mission, its shareholders, and its leadership team, and the people that work there and how they feel about the organization itself. Along with the way of saying, this is sad, and I don't want to, this kind of takes some of the hope away, but I don't want it to fall on you this way. It'll come back because it always comes back. We are 1 year away from some horrific incident where everybody will wake up yet again and come rushing back into this space only to be told the same things that we already. It's part of the reason why I really would love if all of you get a chance to listen to that podcast, because listening to that speech that Gertrude Brown gives in 1927 is like listening to myself and probably hundreds of other people nationally who make the same argument, and she's making that argument in 1927. It's a little humbling for me to hear that. The spear will be for them that I think we have to do a better job of talking about, and I think the courage comes from finding inspiration from the organizations that say, we didn't leave, like we're here. And part of the storytelling, right, the narrative change has to be an anchoring exactly what Rob talked about, and what Rob Vischer, the president of University of St. Thomas, talks about all the time. A culture of encounter where part and parcel of that work is telling the stories that matter about how we care. I'm going to say that again. Telling the stories that matter about how we care. Not that we're perfect, not that we always get it right, but that we care enough to be trying to do the right thing and showing up in this. And again, shout out to Delta Dental. Northside Achievement Zone, Delta Dental's there. Way to grow, Delta Dental. I can't escape Delta Dental. I show up and people are like, do you work at Delta Dental? I'm like, I might work at Delta Dental. I'm not sure if I work at Delta Dental. But I love that you're in all the spaces that are meaningful in this community and in spaces that I don't know, because it's not adjacent to the work that I do. That's the true hallmark of an organization that cares. That isn't the spear. That's more what King was talking about, where you're chasing this desire to say, I just want people to say about us as an organization that we tried to be part of the community in a meaningful way, that we wanted to, you don't want to use the word love, that's fine. We wanted to create a culture of care in our community, and we showed up when it mattered in those conversations that mattered. And no one forced us to be there. We didn't show up because some terrible thing happened. We showed up because we've been here from the very beginning. And when we show up and we stay. So it's a great question.
And before we go, Dr. Williams, talk about your books for 2 seconds. I know we're running over time, and if anyone has to go, but share a little bit. You put your books up there. Introduce us, please, to those particular ones.
Oh, wow. Yeah. This is the new book with Jonathan Eig. This is the adaptation of Eig's Pulitzer Prize winning book, King of Life. Jonathan Eig is a brilliant writer. Part of the reason I didn't want to do this book is I didn't want to adapt a brilliant writer because anyway, Michael Long and I did that. I think we did a nice job. If you don't want to read, if you want kind of a condensed but accessible and engaging version of Eig's very accessible book, then you go with ours. And I think it's, you'll get the essence of Dr. King. Afterlife is a book that I co-authored with or co-edited with Raylan Barnes and Carrie Lee Merritt on the pandemic. And then I think most of you received More Than a Dream, which is our book on the radical roots of the March on Washington last year. And for the first time in, Sarah and I were joking about this, 4 years, I have nothing coming out in the next 2 years. It's going to be a little strange. So thanks, Rod, for that opportunity. However, you can, if you are, Henry Louis Gates has a new documentary coming out on the Great Migration that premieres, I believe, the 31st on PBS. And I'm part of that and very proud of that work. So if you want to kind of see the roots of the Great Migration to places like Minnesota and how people of color became part of the fabric of this community and others, you can check that out.
So thank you, Doc. Can we give Dr. Williams another round of applause? And let me just say, you are a movie star, so stop playing. And you are part of our team. You've got an office down the hall, so stop playing. But no, seriously, I just want to thank, Rod talks about the team. The team is all of you. We just did our listening sessions, Faith and I and others sort of led that. And I came back to Rod and I said it was like unicorns, right? Because we are still all of one accord. It was easy as a team. Most places I've worked, I've had to go to the executive team and say the why we do this work. And we do this work because we're collective. And I didn't have to answer that why. We just got in because it is our DNA, it is our leadership, and it is the work that you're teaching us, Dr. Williams. So thank you. You are a movie star, so keep that in your head. And you don't go to Harvard. I got that. And so,
Finally.
but no, seriously, thank you. Thank you, leadership. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Thanks.